evening, and welcome to Red Frequency TV. Tonight, we have 3 disturbing stories that will make you question just how safe you really are when you're alone. These aren't your typical horror stories. Each one is told from the perspective of someone who experienced something they couldn't explain at the time. Strange encounters, terrifying situations, and moments that completely changed the way they looked at the world around them. But before we get into tonight's stories, I want to say thank you. We set a goal of reaching 50 subscribers, and y'all didn't just hit it, we blew past it. We're now 90 subscribers and counting. That means we're getting dangerously close to 100. And that's because of every single person who's been watching, subscribing, liking, and sharing these videos. So if you're new here, subscribe to Red Frequency TV. If you're already subscribed, hit that like button and leave a red light in the comments. That tells YouTube people are actually enjoying these stories and helps push Red Frequency TV into more people's recommendations. Now turn your lights down, put your headphones on, and whatever you do, don't watch alone. Let's begin. I moved into my first apartment in October. It wasn't anything special. 2nd floor, 2 bedrooms, old carpet, cheap appliances, and a parking lot that always smelled like wet leaves. But it was mine, and after spending most of my life living with other people, I liked having a place where I could come home and not have to talk to anybody. The neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet. There was one house across the street from my building that caught my attention immediately. It was a 2-story brick house with white trim, but nobody seemed to live there. The grass was overgrown, the mailbox was stuffed with flyers, and plywood covered one of the downstairs windows. I asked my landlord about it. Been empty for a while, he said. That was all. For the first couple of weeks, nothing happened. Then, one Thursday night, I was sitting on my couch when I noticed a light across the street. It was upstairs in the abandoned house. I stared at it because I knew the place was empty. I figured maybe somebody had finally started working on it. The light went off. The next night, it happened again. Same window, around the same time. This time, I walked over to my window and looked closer. There was no car in the driveway, no movement outside, just that single yellow light upstairs. Then something moved behind the curtain. A shadow crossed the window. I remember laughing because my first thought was that somebody had finally bought the house. Then I noticed something. The curtains hadn't been there the night before. I stood at the window for several minutes, but nothing else happened. A few days later, I mentioned it to an older neighbor downstairs. He looked across the street and asked what time I'd seen the light. I told him. He didn't laugh. "Don't worry about that house," he said. I asked what he meant. He told me it had been empty since before he moved in. 3 nights later, I saw the light again. This time, 2 upstairs windows were lit. Then I noticed a dark sedan parked behind the house. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out and looked directly at my apartment. I froze. He stood there for about 10 seconds. Then he walked around the side of the house and disappeared. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I checked the street before leaving for work. The sedan was gone, but something was sitting underneath my windshield wiper. A small white piece of paper. I unfolded it. 4 words were written on it. Wrong apartment. Sorry. I stood there staring at the note. Nobody had any reason to leave it on my car. I looked across the street. The abandoned house was completely dark, but one upstairs curtain was slightly open, and for just a second, I thought I saw someone standing behind it. I kept the note instead of calling the police. All day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. If someone had made a mistake, how did they know which car was mine? And why leave the note under my windshield? When I got home, everything looked normal. I checked every room anyway. Nothing was out of place. I started feeling stupid. Maybe someone had mistaken my car for someone else's. I wanted to believe that. Around 1:40 that morning, I heard a car door outside. I went to the window and looked through the blinds. The same dark sedan was parked across the street. The driver's door opened. The same man stepped out. This time, he didn't go toward the abandoned house. He crossed the street. He walked directly toward my building. I backed away from the window. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Then they stopped outside my door. I stood completely still. 3 soft knocks, then silence. Another 3 knocks. I grabbed my phone and called the police. Before I could explain everything, the footsteps moved away. I heard someone walking back down the stairs. When the officers arrived, they searched the building and parking lot. Nobody was there. One officer checked the security camera covering the entrance. It had been broken for almost 2 weeks. I told them about the abandoned house. The officer looked through my window. "Has anyone ever told you about the basement?" he asked. I said no. He explained that the house had been searched before because the previous owner abandoned it after falling behind on taxes. The basement had been sealed. Nobody was supposed to have access. The next morning, police searched the house. They found a broken basement window. Inside was a folding chair, a sleeping bag, empty water bottles, food wrappers, and a small table facing the window that looked directly into my apartment. There were binoculars on the table. Then they found a notebook. Most of it was blank, but several pages had dates across the top. Under each date were times: 6:32 p.m., 11:48 p.m., 7:05 a.m. They were my times. When I left for work, when I came home, when I usually went to sleep. The officer turned the notebook around. My apartment number was written across the top of the first page. Underneath it were 3 words: "He's alone now." I didn't stay there that night. The next morning, my landlord called. Someone had broken into my apartment. Nothing was stolen. But when I went back, I noticed my bedroom window was open. I always kept it locked. Then I saw something sitting on the inside windowsill. A photograph. It was a picture of me sleeping, and whoever took it hadn't been standing across the street. They had been standing inside my bedroom. I didn't touch the photograph. I called the police and waited outside until they arrived. 2 officers searched my apartment from top to bottom. Closets, vents, cabinets, even underneath the bed. They found nothing. Then one officer noticed something behind my dresser. There were fresh scratches on the floor. The dresser had been moved recently. When they pulled it away from the wall, we found a narrow opening in the drywall. Behind it was a maintenance space running between the apartments. The officer shined his flashlight inside. A minute later, he came back holding something. My spare key, the one I'd kept hidden inside a magnetic box underneath my car. I immediately checked my car. The box was still there, empty. The officer asked me if I'd ever noticed anything strange while I was gone. At first, I couldn't think of anything. Then I remembered the little things I'd ignored. Food disappearing, cabinet doors being left open, my bathroom light being on when I knew I'd turned it off, my bedroom door being open when I always slept with it closed. I had convinced myself I was just forgetting. I wasn't. The police followed the maintenance space toward the basement. It connected to another section of the building. then eventually led outside toward the abandoned house. They found fresh footprints. The person had been moving between the buildings, and they had access to my apartment. The police searched the abandoned house again. This time, they found more than a sleeping bag. There were photographs, dozens of them. People leaving their homes, people coming back from work, families sitting in their living rooms. But my photographs filled an entire box. Hundreds of pictures. The man was arrested 2 days later. He turned out to be a former maintenance worker who had worked on the building before I moved in. He knew the layout. He knew about the hidden spaces. He knew which doors didn't lock properly. He had been living inside the abandoned house and watching people throughout the neighborhood. The police found a notebook with my name on it. Inside were details about my daily routine that I'd never told anyone. But one page scared me more than the rest. It had tomorrow's date written across the top. Underneath it said, "He won't be alone tomorrow." I moved out 3 days later. I thought that was the end of it. Months passed. Then one morning, an envelope arrived at my new apartment. No return address. Inside was my old spare key, the same key police had found behind my dresser. There was also a photograph. It showed my new apartment building, taken from across the street. I flipped it over. 3 words were written on the back. "This one's right." I called the police. They searched the area, but found nobody. They never figured out who sent it. The man they'd arrested was still in custody. So whatever that meant, it wasn't him. I haven't looked out my windows at night since. I used to deliver food at night. I preferred the late shifts because there was less traffic, fewer customers, and better tips. Most nights were boring. This happened around 2:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. I got a delivery request from an address about 20 minutes outside the city. The house was way out on a rural road. The customer left a note with the order, "Please leave the food at the back door. Do not knock." I thought that was strange, but people leave weird instructions all the time. I followed the GPS down a road with no streetlights. The farther I drove, the darker it got. Eventually, I reached a long gravel driveway surrounded by trees. At the end was a 2-story house. Every light was off. I checked the address twice. It matched. I grabbed the food and walked toward the back door. The entire property was silent. No cars, no dogs, nothing. I set the bag beside the door and took a picture for the delivery app. As I turned around, my phone rang. It was the customer. I answered. A man's voice immediately said, "You're at the wrong house." I looked back at the address. No, I'm not. "This is the address on the order." There was a long pause. Then he said, "I'm watching you." I looked up at the house. Every window was dark. "Where are you?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "Get back in your car." Something about his voice made me stop joking around. I started walking toward my car. Then I heard something upstairs. A window opened. I looked up. There was a man standing behind the glass. He wasn't moving. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could tell he was looking directly at me. I whispered into the phone, "Is that you?" The customer said, "Don't look at him." I froze. What? His voice dropped to a whisper. "That's not me." The man upstairs suddenly raised one hand. I couldn't tell if he was waving or pointing at me. The customer said, "Listen to me. Get in your car and leave. Don't stop. Don't turn around." I ran. I I got inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror. The man was no longer upstairs. He was standing on the porch, and the customer was still on the phone. Then he said something that made me hit the gas. "You're the third driver I've warned tonight." My sister asked me to watch her house while she was out of town. She has a 4-year-old daughter, so I stayed overnight to keep an eye on her. Everything was normal that first night. Around 1:30 a.m., I was lying on the couch when the baby monitor suddenly turned on. I heard my niece talking. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Then I heard another voice answer her, a man's voice. I sat up. My niece's bedroom was down the hallway. I got up and checked on her. She was asleep. I stood beside her bed for a few seconds, listening to her breathe. Then the man's voice came through the monitor again. "She's awake." I froze. I looked at my niece. She hadn't moved. I picked up the monitor and walked back into the hallway. The voice continued. "She's looking at the door." I looked toward the hallway. Nothing. I checked the monitor. The audio was still coming through. I unplugged it. The voice stopped. I thought maybe someone nearby had accidentally connected to it. Then I heard the man's voice again, except this time, it wasn't coming from the monitor. It was coming from somewhere inside the house. She's standing in the hallway. I grabbed my niece and carried her downstairs. The voice followed us. "She's going to the kitchen." I ran to the front door. Before I could open it, the voice said, "Don't." I stopped. There was something about the way he said it that made me freeze. I looked around the room. That's when I noticed a small Bluetooth speaker sitting underneath a chair. I picked it up. The voice came through it. "Put the girl down." I dropped the speaker and ran outside with my niece. I called the police from the neighbor's house. They searched my sister's home for almost an hour. They found the speaker. They also found another one upstairs. Both were connected to an unknown phone. The police checked the doors and windows. There were no signs of forced entry. Then one officer asked my sister's neighbor if she'd seen anyone around the house that night. She said no, but she remembered seeing a man earlier that evening. He had walked up to the front door. He used a key. The police asked my sister if anyone else had a key. She said no. Then she looked at me. I realized why she was staring. The only person she'd given a spare key to was me. I hadn't told her about something. Earlier that week, I'd lost my spare key. I assumed I dropped it somewhere. The police never found it, and whoever had it had been inside the house before I arrived. They hadn't been watching us from outside. They already knew exactly where we were. And that's where we're going to end tonight's episode of Red Frequency TV. 3 stories, 3 different nightmares, and honestly, the worst part is knowing that none of them needed anything supernatural to be terrifying. If you made it this far, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to Red Frequency TV, and leave a red light in the comments. We're already at 90 subscribers and counting, and we're getting closer and closer to that next milestone. Every like, every comment, every subscription helps this channel reach more people through the algorithm. So if you want to see more disturbing stories like these, help me keep this thing growing. And if one of tonight's stories genuinely creeped you out, tell me which one in the comments. Until next time, keep your doors locked, keep your lights on, and whatever you do, don't watch alone. Good night.